Ahojte moji milí tretiaci, vítam vás na asi poslednej hodine z tejto témy, ktorú máme, a sú to náboženské vojny. Čo znamená pre vás, decká, že budúci týždeň, respektíve tento týždeň pre vás, ak budete mať už tú hodinu 18., čiže vidíte, že ešte 8. mám, čiže 10 dní dopredu, ako mi to máte odovzdať, budete mať termín na odovzdanie, čiže 18. apríla, prosím vás, do 20:00 do večera mi môžete posielať vaše zadania. A aj keď by ste meškali 1 minútu, meškanie 1 minútu neospravedlní. Mali ste na to niekoľko týždňov, mesiace v podstate, takže myslím, že to bolo dosť času na to, aby ste si to zaslali. Nemusíte čakať do tej nedele, do večera, vôbec nie, vy to môžete počas víkendu normálne posielať už v sobotu, dajme tomu, ak obzvlášť viete, že máte slabší internet alebo niečo také. Druhú vec, na ktorú vás chcem upozorniť a s ktorou mali problém štvrtáci, môžete sa ich spýtať, že v podstate len na dobré slovo som nedal v druhej väčšine nejaké horšie známky, ale v ďalšom už budem pristupovať oveľa prísnejšie, to isté platí aj pre vás. A totižto mnohí z nich neuvádzali poriadne zdroje. Čiže znovu vám pripomínam niekoľkýkrát to, čo každú prvú hodinu v dejepise na začiatku školského roka vám vysvetľujem. Máte teda nejakým spôsobom zapísať, máte 2 zdroje hneď na začiatku linkov na Logical Geography k histórii, máte jednak tento wordový dokument, ako citovať zdroje, z ktorých čerpáte, a druhý, ktorý máte taký výcuc, tak máte prezentáciu, ktorú som vám tento školský rok ukazoval, no a na slade 11 je to presne to isté, čiže pokyny na dejepis, no a idete na ako citovať a písať odkazy na zdroje. Ak náhodou zistíte, že potrebujete lepšiu známku, chcete písať referáty, môžete sa mi samozrejme ozvať, ja vám ich totižto tento rok pridelím a takisto pokyny máte niekde tu. No o čo ide, decká, čo je dôležité? V podstate knihy, niektorí z vás využívajú aj knihy, čo vždy ja ocením a pochválim. Tak zásada pri všetkých je to, že hľadáte autora. Autor býva uvedený prvý a je to jeho priezvisko, ktoré by ste mali väčšinou, a ja od vás budem to na dejepise vyžadovať, napísať capital letters, čiže veľkými písmenami. V prípade, že jeho priezvisko alebo mená autorov neviete zistiť z daného článku, môžete tam dať, napríklad máte video z YouTube, tak môžete napísať tam napríklad kanál, Discovery Channel, National Geographic, History Web a tak ďalej. Toto však tiež musí byť potom kurziu capital letters, čiže veľkými písmenami. Potom ide meno, samozrejme, môžete buď celé napísať alebo skrátky, v podstate niekoľko možností. No potom dáte dvojbodku a dáte názov článku. Každý jeden článok, každé jedno video má nejaký nadpis, čiže toto vy musíte dať. Toto nám nestačí. Musíte dať ešte ďalšie veci. V prípade kníh je to napríklad vydavateľstvo a mesto. Môže to byť samozrejme nejaká inštitúcia, ktorá tú publikáciu vydala. No a v prípade článku z internetu samozrejme taký History Web alebo National Geographic alebo Wikipedia. V podstate to už je zjavné z toho linku, čiže vy to druhýkrát nemusíte písať, ak máte autora. Ak nemáte, samozrejme napíšete to na začiatku. No, ďalšia vec, ktorá musí byť, a keďže vy drvej väčšine využívate internetové zdroje, tak musíte napísať, kedy ste to použili. Niekedy ten článok bol napísaný, no môže byť aj 10 rokov starý, ale odtedy oni ten článok upravovali. Iba Wikipedia má takú históriu skrytú pri každom článku, že aké boli úpravy. Vy si môžete všetky tie verzie tých článkov prečítať spätne a pozrieť a vidieť tie dátumy. Ak vy však preberiete nejaký údaj, ktorý medzi tým zmazali, upravili, opravili, tak niekto by vám to mohol vytýkať. Ja viem, že máme politikov, ale buďme lepší ako oni. No a preto napíšete dátum, kedy ste to použili. Čiže tam bude dátum, kedy ste s tým pracovali. Toto nie je problém, no a samozrejme v angličtine day, napíšete. No a posledné, čo musí byť pri internetovom zdroje, available at, čiže dostupné na, a dáte link na ten kontakt. Nestačí mi link, ak to zbadám, že máte niektoré linky čisto bez takéhoto nejakého popisu, že máme teda priezvisko, máme meno, máme nadpis kurzívou a máme ešte deň, kedy ste to použili. Ak vám toto chýba, tak ja vám nejdem hodnotiť zadanie a dávam vám 5. Takže dúfam, že je to jasné. Ak máte problém s otváraním PowerPointu, tak máte to isté ešte aj napísané vo Worde, stále to tam je, čiže máte to presne napísané, že ako to má asi vyzerať. Dal som vám 2 príklady, jeden je z denníka Pravda a jeden je práve z History webu. Dobre, dúfam, že to je jasné, decká, dúfam, že to je teda jasné, no a mrzia, že som teda strávil tých 5 minút takýmito pokynmi, ale budem rád, ak sa nejakým spôsobom tomuto vyhnete. Je to jednak pre vás, ak to predbežne robíte ľahké, máte istú jednotku potom. Samozrejme, ak spravíte všetky cvičenia. Boli viacerí takíto fiškusy, že z každého zadania, čo vy máte v podstate 3 asi, sa mi zdalo 4 také menšie rozdelené, tak môžem dať aj viacej známok napríklad. A z každého chýbal, že 2-3 cvičenia alebo pár vied nedoplnil, čo mohlo byť 10, doplnil 8. A ja som mu hneď za to cvičenie máš 5% dole, 10%. A pri 40 alebo 20 cvičeniach sa vám to nazbiera také, že zrazu bum, boli 104. Takže prosím, dajte si na to pozor a pracujte poriadne. Máte pár dní. Nenechajte si to na poslednú chvíľu, to je dôležitá vec. Štvrtáci mi to posielali, polovica z nich mi to poslala v priebehu poslednej hodiny. Jasne, že padal u nich web a neviem čo všetko, sa im to nedarilo, to je známka pre mňa, že jednoducho robíte na poslednú chvíľu. Ďalšia vec bude, ak budem vidieť, že je to odpísané, že sú rovnaké údaje, najmä pri venových diagramoch napríklad. Čiže takých veciach, ktoré sú vašou tvorčou kreativitou a jednoducho sú na vás, ako ich vypracujete, tak pokiaľ vy to jednoducho odpíšete, tak znamená, že ste sa nad tým nezamysleli a jednoducho ste ukradli informáciu. A ak ste niekomu poskytli informáciu, tak ste podporili toho človeka lenivosť a nezodpovednosť. No prepáč, že tak tvrdo, len 2 týždne opravovania takýchto vecí v kúse od rána do večera je až na hlavu, človek je potom šiši, takže dúfam, že u vás to bude všetko v pohode a budete spokojní aj vy a samozrejme aj ja. Takže to je hlavný účel. Dobre, poďme teda na poslednú tému, ktorú máme. Máme tam skoro 20 slajdov, ktoré ešte musíme prejsť a sú to 3 témy. Hneď po alžbetínskom Anglicku, Elizabethan era, máme Nizozemsko, čiže Holandsko. Potom veľmi stručne o protireformácii, čo my nazývame rekatolizácia. Budeme samozrejme to preberať aj pri tých našich dejinách, pretože hneď po tejto téme pôjdeme na Habsburskú monarchiu, respektíve Slovensko-Habsburskej monarchii, čo je v ranom novoveku. A potom nakoniec na tú najväčšiu tému, to je 30-ročná vojna a jej následky. Touto vojnou sa potom tie náboženské vojny ukončujú a v západnej Európe v podstate sa ustanovia a vlastne aj u nás, aj v Strednej Európe sa ustanovia v podstate také náboženské hranice a rozdelenie, ktoré tu máme. Dobre, takže samozrejme pero do ruky, ceruzky do ruky, máte tam niekoľko údajov, ktoré máte aj k týmto veciam doplniť, takže hor sa na to do tých tabuliek môžete vypisovať a ušetríte si čas. Dobre, okay, so let's start from the beginning. Don't forget to answer the question that I have given to you. As always, I don't know yet what it's going to be. All right, so another country that somehow was influenced by these religious wars and Reformation was the Netherlands. About the history of this small country in territory, big with population and with history, is actually similar to many other Western European countries. The meaning, the etymology of the name means Niederlanden, which means the law lands. That's why also in Czech language and also in Slovak language, the ancient or older name for this is Nizozemsko, Nížinaté zeme, krajiny. Of course, there were many cultures and so on during the history. From those that I would recommend you to remember were, for example, Belgs or Belgians, who were actually Celtic tribes living in these territories, and they were mentioned by Gaius Julius Caesar in his De Belle Gallico, about the Gallic Wars. Actually, they were Romanized, but it was approximately to the river Rhine and southward. So this was just the ethnic border where Roman Empire had this limes Romanus, the fortification and influence of Latin language. Northward of it, it remained Germanic, because that was actually part of this Germanic motherland, I would call it, like origin lands. In this way, even these territories were divided in these two ethno-linguistic groups, and they were Francophonic, so thus French-speaking Wallonians in the south, just like Wallonia in Belgium today, and in the north there were Germanic tribes of, for example, Batavians and even Frisians in the north. There were names of Germanic tribes. Of course, they kept their own Germanic language that is really, I would say, German. If you ever thought that German is really harsh, so probably you heard Mr. Haas speaking his Dutch, and this is actually really like the cradle of English and even German, despite they hate both of these countries. Okay, in the south, these Dutch-speaking peoples will be called Flemish, according to the Duchy of Flanders, Albo Vlaamsk, Albo Vlamia, Wallonie. But in the north, they would be called just with their own Germanic name. But German name is the name German comes from Latin, and they themselves, they call, like, you know how Germans call themselves, it's Deutsch or Deutschland, and this is actually the etymology of Dutch, which means actually their own language, that means like the people. Okay, what else? During the Middle Ages, it was integral part of Francia, or Frankish Empire, and after its division, it became part of Lotharingia, because we have the River Rhine, and after also the Mersin Treaty, it became part of this German-speaking, the Holy Roman Empire. So actually these Francophonic, French-speaking people in Luxembourg, in Flanders, they didn't, Bruges, they didn't like it very much, of course, but there were a couple of these French-speaking Francophonic provinces of Holy Roman Empire. This is like also important thing, because as Holy Roman Empire will have these elected emperors, they didn't mind them, because they didn't have power and didn't influence them very much. So in this way, they could develop their own freedom in small principalities and free towns and free landlords and so on, just like any other German state. Now, the problem started when the emperors of Holy Roman Empire started to be from the Habsburg family, and especially when Austrian Habsburgs agree that, hey, our cousins from Spain, from Habsburg Spain, you can have these lands for a while. And that was really dramatic change, because these guys were Catholics, and Dutch, of course, was influenced from Germany or from Switzerland, they became Protestants. So this was actually the thing that we start. By the time they didn't even think about some independence and so on, because Dutch language was not very big different from this Low German or Upper German or Danish Germanic languages and so on. So that was not such a big deal. For that reason, even they really had developed economy and culture, they built a lot of manufacturers, they developed sea trade, building ships, and they built strong cities like Bruges, Brussels, Antwerpen, Liège, Amsterdam, Hague, Rotterdam, or Luxembourg even was part of this. Why? Because, as you know, the lowlands and Netherlands had a big problem that this country is actually just on the sea level, and it's being flooded, all its history. So already in Middle Ages they were building these boulders that are kind of a dams or dimes that actually are just barriers for the sea. And today 1/3 of the territory of Netherlands is situated below the sea level. So it's really dramatic, and this climate change is probably will strike Netherlands harsh. This is maybe reason why Mr. Haas moved so like up to hills to our lands. Okay, the other reason is there, but I'm not going to mention it. But the thing is that they had to be really clever, and they knew that this small land they couldn't like produce and didn't have any mining. So the only thing they had is the brain. Is the talents and work hard and hard work. And when you combine these things, so education and hard labor together, you can be really rich, even when you build a city on the sea like Amsterdam, like on the canals, but it's like on islands. So in this way, this Netherlands or Dutch provinces as a Holy Roman Empire, imperial lands came under the rule of Spanish Habsburgs at the beginning of the 16th century. Especially during the reign of the Philip II, he started with strict recapitalization, or as English would call it, like counter-reformation. So you see I got many mistakes there. And this is interesting that it became successful in Francophonic provinces. And this ethnicity is probably important thing, because when you have books that you can use it, or if you have a language that came from Latin, so you may be more willing to read the Bible of the Catholics, and if you speak some other languages, that's a different thing. Yeah, you may claim that, but what about Calvinists? And this is other thing, that there were many of these guys who became like Calvinists. But the point was that these Calvinists, especially in the north, in the northern territories, who became there because it was really matchful with their way of life, with their means of living, for example. So they, since like 1568, they started with the kind of like open resistance, with fighting Spanish troops and resisting against this counter-reformation. At the same time, they realized that the only thing how to get rid of the Catholic pressure, it means to seize independence within the country and so on. So at least they tried to seize autonomy, at least from Spain, and thus also religious freedom. Of course, but when sometimes some of the dukes or lords were willing to come to become Catholics again, but people resisted, and these, how to say, revolts of people grew by themselves, and this Dutch resistance turned out to be kind of like popular people's movement. That's why also the leader William of Orange from one of the Dutch noble families, being elected like as kings or rulers. So he was elected as the leader, as commander of these lands. Of course, firstly they got support from England, who start to call it 80 Years' War, which is not very common among the Dutch, neither in our countries, because as you realize we call it Dutch Revolution. I will explain in the end why. Of course, Spanish armies intervened into Netherlands. They invaded these lands, and under the command of Duke of Alba, who became, like he was named, appointed the governor of Netherlands, he set up with the terror in provinces, because it is not such an easy thing to defeat an army and so on, because almost all the people in the north were Calvinists. So how can you force them to change their religion? It is impossible. So they can surrender, give up, but then they never stop fighting you. So are you going to kill like children and rape women? Yes. This is the thing. This is the way how Duke of Alba thought that he can oppress. The only way how to oppress the partisan warfare would be this one. So even another two famous leaders of this Dutch resistance, General Egmont and Admiral Horn, were actually captured, and despite being noblemen, they were executed, which was absolutely uncommon at those times. This is also that 17th century was really difficult in many things, and for the first time it happened that noblemen were being executed for religious differences. So Admiral Egmont and Admiral Horn also fighting in here and being executed. So they became, together with the of Orange, they became kind of like heroes of this resistance. Okay, what else? This picture here depicts settlement and discoveries of the Dutch navigators. If you remember, they were among the countries that they also colonized many lands over the seas, and this is probably somewhere near Cape Town in South Africa. And the flag they are bearing is a flag of the armies fighting under the command of Egmont and Horn, and under command of William of Orange, and his color is blue. Why? Spanish armies were with different colors, and they didn't have blue, so that's why Dutch armies start to wear white and blue uniforms. But also to make distinction and to show solidarity, or that they are being commanded by William of Orange, they started to wear orange color. So they were wearing like sometimes orange uniforms, orange ribbons, for example, like this, and stripes, and on their ships, to make it very distinctive from, let's say, English or French ships, they start to use this combination of three colors with orange color, because it got yellow in the seas and the bad weather, so they changed it to red, and this is how Dutch flag came to be, and that's explain you why they have this King's Day or football events, for example, so they're all wearing orange colors, and Oranges, as their nickname of the sports team, comes from this name of William of Orange. Actually, they didn't have orange color in their coats of arms, which is interesting. Okay, let's move on. when Duke of Alba started up terror, that even more motivated people to start fighting, and because their army was destroyed, they had no other chance only to fight like partisans. Partisan warfare, some very that I would compare it to guerrilla warfare, is based upon civilians being armed and fighting from behind, sometimes like attacking weaker troops, night attacks, assassinations, various plots, and traps, and in this way. So they avoided open battle against a big army because they were not organized like this. But if they could fight like an attack from hidden, like assassins, that would be perfect. Netherlands was not mountainous. It's not mountainous country at all, so it's really difficult. They they don't even have forests. Some forests are in here, in the north, but that's all. And but the way how you can fight them is when you have a lot of boats, a lot of small ships, and canals, and all in these lakes, and it's actually very easy to avoid these battles when you attack from these canals and sea, and just attack them, and again got on the ship, and or a boat, actually it's not a ship but a boat, and actually run away. And again you can actually sail to England with this small ship. So in this way they started to be organized in two types of partisans, or this militia, čiže domobrana, and they started to be called with nice name that I started to learn in Slovak language. Ich nazývame Gézovia. Morskí Gézovia a lesní Gézovia, čiže ako lesní elfovia. But this is interesting. Mr. Haas, I asked him, what does it mean, this Gezen? I know Gezen. Gezen, it means beggar. The reason why beggar, because Spanish army, they were like baroque guys, so they had a lot of ornaments and beautiful clothes, and most of these Dutch, they were like this guy, like simple black wearing clothes, and they didn't have any specific clothes, any decorations around. So Spanish start to mock them. You look like beggars. So are we Gezen? Do we look like Gezen? Let it be. And Gezen will defeat beautiful, shining Spanish army, because that is what happened. Actually, in English they are not called Gezen, but in Slovak you can meet with this Gezovia, but in Dutch too, of course. But in English they call them sea beggars or wood beggars, and it means partisans or guerrilla warfare warriors. And this was so successful that Spanish armies had really big problems with occupying especially these northern lands, especially when Dutch still was supported by other Protestant countries, Denmark and England too, so they had enough weapons to actually overrule all these territories and banish Spaniards from here. When Spaniards realized that probably that was very bad way how to deal with the situation, to set up terror, because violence causes another violence all the time. So next governors appointed by Spain decided rather to use diplomacy. And when they realized that probably they are not capable of sending more armies to Netherlands and just force people to change it, because they even refused to allow schools for Catholics. There was strict abolishment of Catholicism in the north. It was not like in Poland or in Hungary, in Slovakia. They just open the schools, defeat their army, and open schools, and within 3 generations, most of our town are Catholics. Not this way. So they rather decided to save the rest of Netherlands that was still Catholic, and it was like so-so. So for that reason, they decided to use diplomacy and diplomatic skills and persuade the landlords, lords and bishops of the southern provinces to proclaim actually separation from the north of Netherlands. And thus in 1579 southern Catholic provinces created so-called the Union of Arras. Union of Arras is actually nowadays Belgium and plus Luxembourg, but at the time, of course, it was different. There were small parts of Netherlands in here, but contemporary Belgium, which is interesting because half of Belgians are Dutch. They call themselves Flemish, but the only difference that made them different from the Dutch, from Holland, from Netherlands, is that they were Catholics, and they not they were Protestants or Calvinists from the Reformed Church. In the same month of the same year, of course, so northern Protestant provinces finally, okay, so we can do it. Of course, it was not official because these southern Catholics proclaimed independence before them, but they were happy to do that, and they proclaimed the creation of the Union of Utrecht. And in this Union of Utrecht, they proclaimed Calvinist regime, and they decided to elect their own king, who would be mostly like governor. In couple of lessons, when we come back to English lessons, we'll actually speak about English revolutions and all these curse of wars and conflicts come up with English inviting the king of Netherlands to be also the king of England, which he refused. So they offered it to his deputy, who was also elected, and he was also from this family of Orange, but his name was William III of Orange, and he became the new king and establisher of Hanover dynasty that is still on in England and United Kingdom. This Union of Utrecht also interesting development and evolution because, as I said, the king were elected by whom? It was kind of assembly of various representatives of states, of provinces, of Zeeland, Holland, of Overijssel, of Friesland, Groningen, cities, Amsterdam, Hague. They had their own representatives in this assembly, and that's why they start to have experiments that we don't need a king. Well, let's proclaim something that Venice and Genoa have, and that's republic. And later on, this Dutch Republic was proclaimed. Official independence was approved by surrounding states in 1609. Despite they had to fight again on, and French or England again. United Kingdom challenged their independence, so they had to fight fiercely. And only when the 30 Years' War was over in 1648, they could proclaim creation of not republic but of the kingdom with constitutional monarchy institution, despite we suppose England as the first one, but it was not the one. The Netherlands was the first one, and they started to be called United Provinces of the Netherlands, which its name didn't change so much. Still, it was Kingdom, Kangelinge der Nederlanden, but official name is United Provinces of Netherlands, where a king is elected by these guys, famous paintings by various Rembrandt van Rijn and so on, and guys depicting merchants, landlords, people who can change a destiny. Very Renaissance and at the same time Baroque, but without Catholicism, it is still Renaissance. It is still humanism, and that's why the Dutch today are, I would say, very open-minded, very liberal, and very hardworking. This is something they have from Calvinism and from their conditions they have to live in. Okay, so this is the end of 80 Years' War. Let's move on the next topic, and I will probably switch this picture if possible. No, sorry, because you probably will not see that. Okay, I will. Actually, I can do this. I can do this thing. Counter Reformation. This I will move this Council of Trent. Sorry for that, guys. And even this portrait of Ignatius of Loyola. You saw the guy, and you probably cannot see it like this. Okay, and maybe just make these small changes in here. Okay, I believe it will be better for you. Okay, so what is Counter-Reformation? Protireformácia. Simply in Slovak language we call it Recapitalization. The reason why we call it a different name is because it was successful in here. We were Catholics, or we had been Catholics, then we were Protestants, we came back to Catholic religion again, Recapitalization. But in Western Europe it was not successful at all. So that's why they just start to call it Counter-Reformation, because it was not successful. So two terms and different ones. Okay, of course, Catholic Church, what they were doing during all these years. Did they leave indulgences? Did they have this purgatory? And so on. So now Catholic Church, since Martin Luther started his teachings and publishing his volumes, so they had to persuade people either to stay or to rejoin the Catholic Church, a Roman Catholic Church. That's why this recapitalization is more like Slovak term, not very common in English. Actually, not common in English. They were officially, as we teach there were four main means of recapitalization. So the ways how to keep people within the church or how to take them back to the church. First was that they needed to react to the dogmas. They were being challenged. So what to do with this virginity of Jesus and Virgin Mary and intersection of saints and so on. So for that reason, they not very willingly, but in 1545, the bishops and archbishops, the clergy of Roman Catholic Church, met in Trent in Italy in a big council, religious council. If you remember these big councils like in Constance and Nicaea, they're always changing very important dogmas of Catholicism, and that will happen the same thing. How should they react? As you see, they were arguing, disputing for almost like 20 years, like 18 years, and they accepted one important thing. They said, well, Martin Luther is not right, but it's true that there is no mention about purgatory or indulgences. So we should not sell indulgences. That's all. They just quit it. Okay. What about with purgatory? Okay, it's not mentioned in the Bible, but belief of many people in purgatory is so strong, so let it be on each priest. And it will be just open dogma, open doctrine to consult and unbelievers if you believe in purgatory or not, očistit, okay? If if you are purified or not. That's all. Okay, they refused to dispute about like virginity of Virgin Mary and the section of saints, but it was the only thing that actually they accepted main criticism of Martin Luther, and they claim it back. So I would say that Roman Catholic Church came back in history like 500 years to the past, as it was at like let's say 11th century, because other dogmas came up later on. What they remained was celibacy of priests and maybe this virginity of Virgin Mary and divinity of Jesus Christ and Holy Spirit and so on. So many of the things that were being criticized are there in Catholicism, but they are not in the Bible. So when you open the Bible, usually there are footnotes, poznámky, like I want you to write down, but it's not where does it come from, but there is kind of explanation. What is the meaning? How you should interpret it? And this is something that is actually interesting to use it in history books, but in theological books, they actually tell you how to understand it, okay? But there is no official teaching in purgatory. Ask your priest, in this way. Indulgences, they quit selling them. So in this way, this Council of Trent became very important because they just um, reformed it a bit, and the other things they left it for people to for interpretation. And in this way, it became, how to say, very modern for those times and usable in practice. And in this way, Roman Catholic Church could be more functional, could one way survive, and could claim many things, many lands back. And in this way, this trend is actually got also a different name from German, thus in Czech and Slovak is used, the Council of Trident. Po slovensky to nazveme teda Tridentský koncil. And this is very important. Actually, another council that was organized in mid 19th century and then in 1960s, the first and second Vatican Council, and they were all. And you see that it was done in the way that they could use it for many other years. The second mean of recapitalization were Jesuits. That's for us also important because our school was in the hands of Jesuits for about 2 centuries, 200 years. Who were these Jesuit Order or Order of Jesus or the Society of Jesus? Founded in 1534. It was founded by this guy. He was a Spanish priest that he asked the Pope, like, Orders, these monastic orders, were being widely criticized by Luther, and in many countries they just destroyed them, killed the priests, and took over monasteries and their possessions. The reason was that, for example, Dominicans, even Martin Luther was Dominican. They didn't like this thing that we only take it. We should give back something. And he proposed to Pope to found the Society of Jesus, in which Catholic priests would be, yeah, taking these lands and possessions of Protestants back if possible, but how to keep this uh, counter reformation on and successful would be establishing and taking over schools and education, because this becomes the most important weapon in the religious war. It's information, just like today. when you have media, and media of those times were books because they were being printed, and where you can offer the books, you can pick them up, which books to read is at school. We can navigate you teachers. And this is where Jesuits were, of course, established, and they start to work in many countries concerned on education. So Ignatius of Loyola studied that in the towns, usually it was in the towns, not in the countryside, because towns are the cradle of education or influence even to countryside, usually. And this Jesuit order started to take over schools. What happened also in Banská Štiavnica, that our school was evangelical, Protestant. Since like 1520s, 30s, gymnasium in Banská Štiavnica was Protestant. And then when Jesuits finally came to Banská Štiavnica, like mid 17th century or late 17th century, so after one and a half century, so Jesuits took over the school, started teaching instead of German and Czech, they started to teach in Latin and only in Catholicism. And despite, it was not education, they can criticize teacher, that we can argue, we can have an argument, you can complain, about us if we teach badly, in bad way. But not at that time. So within 3-4 generations, Jesuits managed to change whole young generations in the town. So their parents and grandparents were surprised that suddenly their grandchildren are suddenly Catholics because they were taught at schools by these guys. They were also very successful in the New World in America, not very much in Asia, but the most successful were in Poland and Lithuanian Union, and in the Kingdom of Hungary, in Austria and in Hungary. So that is also explanation why our country is not dominantly Protestant, but is mostly Catholic because of Jesuit schools. Gymnasium in Banská Štiavnica was Jesuit until second half of the 18th century, when Maria Theresa and Joseph II, great enlightened emperors, abolished Jesuit order, and they gave our school and all schools secondary schools, they gave to the under the command or under the educational process of another order that was called Piarists. They were much more moderate, and it was not so violent, I would say, in Jesuit. Of course, they kept a lot of knowledge, and so many of them for Catholics, they are really like great guys, but not very much for Protestants, I would say. The other is Inquisition, and the other is Baroque art. So the Inquisition, it had been known because Inquisition exists even today, and it's one of the offices of Roman Catholic Church as a part under the control of the Holy See from Vatican. So actually, there are priests who are being trained and taught, and they practice how to banish some witchcraft or bad ghosts or demons and so on. Of course, in Middle Ages, they tried to look for some heretic guys and so on. But now again, in Spain, for example, they went on with expulsion of Moors and Jews, and they learned actually the way that how to force people to accept confession was to torture them. And since 16th century, this Inquisition started to be popular again because they start to lead war, this like kind of jurisdictional war against Protestants, but also against witches. And we even Protestants were gone, so they start to hunt for the witch hunts and witchcraft trials in here. So this Inquisition was really important in many countries. They just start to burn Protestants at stake. So no wonder that Jean Calvin, he also sent Miguel Servetta to stake because Catholics were doing the same thing. So not very nice picture. Okay, the last thing was Baroque art. How can art be the weapon? Just like Sputnik, sorry, Sputnik 5, that can be like hybrid weapon because it's not about like open warfare. You see, there are pressures from education, from some judicial system. There is actually kind of dogmatic, general doctrine. But other thing is, for example, when I wear a T-shirt, okay, with some band, I don't have a band, and has ever happened that you actually play that band at home? You know, this kind of influence. What do you wear? What do you show up, show off? What posters you have? What hairstyles you have? Okay, so it's all explanation or not explanation, but expression of your opinions, of your philosophy, of your religion. And when it is really great, really cool, so other people are attracted by this. Yeah, that's cool. Nirvana, a couple of days ago there was anniversary of Nirvana, the suicide of Kurt Cobain from Nirvana. And this is the thing that when you see how cool it was, or metal or punk or hip hop, it looks excellent. So you're going to listen to it and obey it. And this was what happened. The Baroque art was actually art of counter-reformation of Catholic Church. And in the times when Protestants were refusing these beautiful ornaments and gold and like I'm looking for words from art and culture, but it's like growing, overwhelming, beautiful, growing lot of gold and living, and it's astonishing. This is visual astonishment. So imagine when you for the first time entered this kind of like Baroque temples with this cupola, with beautiful paintings, God and golden sun shining, and majestic tympanum with Greek pillars and altars, a lot of gold, a lot of statues. Okay, so this is incredible. And imagine a guy, a simple peasant, entering new church in Banská Bystrica, in Svätý Anton, in Štiavnica. They were amazed. And this is like once in Kievan Rus, Prince Vladimir decided to accept Byzantine rite because it was more beautiful. So this happened the same thing. So many people were astonished by this, and it was kind of this religious emotionalism. It was actually nice to sit in the church and just look around. So probably if you sit in the sermon so very often, you just like watch there. If you don't pray, of course. Protestants, that's why they want to refuse all the luxury, all these pulpits, ornaments, and so on, decorations. So because they wanted to pray, to feel inside, and not to be like amazed by visuals. Okay, it is like a huge advertisement, like on Manhattan. So you have all the commercials popping up. This is like Baroque art. So that's why it's important, and that's why you can see it in the countries where Jesuit Order was successful and where successful Catholic House of the Habsburgs was ruling. In Spain, in Belgium, not in Netherlands, in Austria, Slovakia, and Hungary, but not so much in Bohemia. But in Moravia, yes, because they were Catholics. Okay, you can see it in southern Germany, in Bavaria, but not in northern Germany. You cannot see these Baroque buildings very much in Baltic lands apart from Lithuania, because Lithuania is the only Catholic country there. Poland, the same thing. Okay, in Scandinavia, probably you will not see any Baroque art because there were no Catholics at all. The same thing is in England. So even the things, the sites, UNESCO sites, and churches and buildings, they can be really different according to religion. Okay, so let's move on. And after this, I check my time. So Counter Reformation thus was successful only in the countries that I'm named, so Habsburg lands and Poland, Lithuania, which is actually pretty big, important deal. Okay, one of the important task I gave you is to draw a mind map about these terms below. Uh, I believe you're going to make it in various things. Please do not copy because the only goal, the only aim is to teach you something. If you're not interested, this is actually you will meet for all your lives. And it's really big difference if you come to America, let's say to USA or to, I don't know, United Kingdom, and you start to like force somebody to become Catholic or Protestant, and they would be Irish from Northern Ireland, or they would be from Methodist Church. So this is really important to know and to understand what are the confessions in our civilization. So that's for that reason I added not only the this Western Schism, but even Eastern Schism, guys, even Greek Catholics, because I shall mention them also in our history with the Union of Uzhhorod. But also I added Jews, Muslims, and so on. Why? Because even Christianity, it was not the first one, okay? And even Islam, it's not like separated religion, but they have some connections. And think about them, try to analyze them, and just make them something like this is an example. Okay, let's move to 30 years war, but what I want to check is that I have 16 minutes. I believe that will be enough for me because I don't want to say a lot about it. So I will just follow the notes and I believe I can make to the final plan. So 30 years war in since 1618 till 1648. No tricks, just like with 100 years war. This almost exactly lasted for 30 years. It started as a series of conflicts between Catholic and Protestant countries and realms and also their allies, because not all of them were either Protestant or Catholics. There were many various um, things and situations that made Catholics to fight Catholics, for example. Later on, this religious conflict became pretense to struggle for power in Europe between two dynasties, two great houses of Europe of those times. And they were Habsburgs in Austria and Germany, and Habsburgs in Spain, and on one hand, a new dynasty in France, and they were Bourbons. This Henry IV, the Bourbon, he was the guy, and his sons, since Louis the 13th, 14, they were guys who were fighting in 30s war, but they were Catholics already. But on the side of Protestants, because their bigger enemy than Protestantism were Habsburgs. They could claim the rule above France. It was the only conflict in history in which all European countries participated. In the end, I have a chart. I found a chart then where all the countries were. Tell me the country, I give you the side on which they were fighting, either Catholic Union, a Catholic League, or Protestant Union. Okay, even in Finland, it was part of Sweden. Andorra, it was Catholic. They were Spain. Okay, for example, Ireland was Catholic. So of course they had to fight on the side of the English, but they had uprisings against the English and supported by Spain. Ottoman Empire, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, they were supporting Protestants in our countries, in Slovakia. So this is really interesting stuff. Okay, still, it was the largest, the grandest military conflict between Napoleonic Wars, where even bigger armies were being deployed. But interesting, they had smaller casualties. Despite it was terrible, in Napoleonic Wars they couldn't hide, but there were higher casualties, vyššie straty, than in here. The first war that actually just 1 million more casualties were there was First World War. So before two world wars in 20th century, this was the most terrible, the biggest conflict in Europe, and thus in the world. If maybe in China there could have been some. Still, especially for Western Europe, it really shaped religious and thus political borders until 19th and 20th century, for the period of nationalism, and world wars and so on. And all it started not with this Spanish spearmen troop formation, but with this event, and it is second, the defenestration of Prague. If you remember, the first defenestration of Prague, that was a Hussite period, and second happened almost 2 centuries later. That's why in the phases of 30 Years' War, we start talking about Bohemian Revolt. In Slovak language, we use Czech version, and Czechs are proud of this. Or actually, not maybe proud, but it's their big history. So they don't call it only rebellion, zbura, but they call it war. Bohemian War, Česká vojna, tak to budeme aj my Slovenčine nazývať. So this is 1618, 1620, 21, pardon. This is so-called Bohemian Revolt, the Bohemian War. The king in Bohemia was Friedrich the Winter King. Friedrich, who had been the landlord in West and East Pfalz, which is part of Germany, and his title was officially Palatine of Pfalzen. Palatine of Pfalz, or Prince Elector. And when he escaped from this Bohemian revolt, so war actually followed him, and that's why he brought war to his land, to Germany, to Pfalz, and that's why it got two names, either Palatinate War or Pfalzen War. Po slovensky a po česky nazývam toto Pfalzská vojna, Pfalzko, ako krajina, kde ten Friedrich žil, and it will last for 2 years. Then, because the Protestants were being defeated in Germany, so gradually one country by another entered war to save Protestants from defeat. Firstly, they were Danes, and it lasted for 4 years. Then Sweden, with their excellent army, not for 5 years, because they stayed in Europe, but to help Swedes, another country is coming, and that's France. So that's why we talk about this Česká vojna, Falská vojna, Dánska vojna, Švédska vojna a nie francúzska vojna, ale francúzsko-švédska vojna, because Swedes are still in Bohemia, let's say, or in Germany, so we count it like this. Still, I would count one period that when the military campaigns were almost gone. There were only one, and it was Swedish invasion to Bohemia. But for almost like 1 year, there were whole negotiations that we call Westphals or Westphalian peace. Westphalski, yeah, that would come in 1648. So let's come to the point. Before the war, and actually even after the war, situation in Europe in 1600 was in this way. We had Catholic Europe. That was Habsburg, that was, of course, Italy, and that was France, but a lot of Huguenots, as you can see, in southern France. Then we have in Austria and southern Germany. Habsburgs were strictly like trying to counter-reform, recapitalize these lands. That caused a lot of conflicts, a lot of rebellions. Some of these kings, as you will see, uh, had kind of like tolerance, like in France. But when another kings came, and you will see that they start with counter-reformation, which broke rebellions, and it was case of lands in Hungary because it was closely connected also with Bohemia, and it started and then started to fight war against Protestants, Anglicans, and even Calvinists. So all these yellows are in here. This red, or what color is it? This is Eastern Orthodox Church, and this violet is Islam. So interesting. So let's start with the first one, Bohemian Revolt. Well, I should be really brief because I just read Historická revue and it was completely about this Bohemian Revolt. So what happened? Since the 16th century, as you know, after the fall of Jagiellonians, Habsburgs even ruled in the Czech lands, which is Bohemia, Moravia, Silesia, and Lusatia. At that time, much bigger. Again, in the map, as you see, this was actually even borders of Czech lands. So Silesia, čiže Sliesko, and Lusatia, Lužica. This was mostly populated by Germans and Poles, or Serbs, as they are being called, Lužickí Srbi, and they were all evangelicals. Czechs, on the other hand, were either these Czech brethren, thus Hussite church. Many of them were Calvinists. They call it also Českobratská církev, that is like evolved, developed from these Hussite, and some, especially in Moravia, were Catholics. Still, there were many Germans, so thus there were also a lot of evangelicals. For that reason, they after the rule of various Maximilian and so on, and Ferdinand, Habsburg, Rudolf II, he was forced to proclaim religious tolerance. This mad emperor, and really famous for this Císařův pekař, Pekařův císař, definitely watch it. It's really nice to watch it historically, or read Juraj Červenák books. Štána Barbarič. So he issued so-called the Letter of Majesty. My to nazývame po slovensky, po česky nie, že list jeho majestátu, ale Rudolfov majestát. And it was documents from 1609 that proclaimed this religious tolerance. But later on, as he was getting more and more crazy, not able to rule, so he was replaced by his brother, younger brother that was much more tough, and that was Matthew II. He ignored it, and he started with recapitalization. One of his generals, General Carafa, fighting also in our lands. So he actually burned down and annihilated all Calvinists living in Austria. This is actually like not very known chapter of Austrian history, that all Protestants were actually killed in Austria. It was Catholic country because they just killed them, and he ignored it. Actually, soon before, he was also forced to resigned because there were a lot of uprisings all around, especially in Kingdom of Hungary with Stefan Bocskai, István Bocskai, but even in Bohemia, it was really like trembling for something to be happen, and it happened in 1618. Again, I have to show you another picture, so probably okay, like this. You will see it maybe they're throwing guys out of the window. Okay, so I just put it back. In which this nobility and representatives of cities from Bohemia had still tradition of meeting a Zemski Snem. This is like a state assembly. They were called Bohemian estates. They were mostly Protestant. So cities and nobility assembled in Prague and well prepared as a protest against Catholic policy. They decided to march to the castle of Prague, and they threw two governors of the Habsburgs from the windows of the Prague castle. It is actually a couple of meters, and there was like bunch of men here. So both of the guys survived. One he had like broken leg, the other broken arm. Both of them were saved by Catholics. But this was the second defenestration of Prague and beginning of this Bohemian Protestant revolt. Now led by nobles, was without support of peasants. So they expected help from other Protestant countries, but the only support really came from this Hungarian rebelling Duke of Transylvania, Gabriel Bethlen, that was second big uprising anti-Habsburgs. And for that reason, they also elected new king because they dethronized the Habsburgs. So they elected new king who was actually hesitating, but he was persuaded by Czechs because they believed that, especially thanks to his wife, she was actually Princess of England, they could claim great allies. Together they believed that as Prince Elector of Palatinate of Pfalz, he will bring like the support of all northern German dukes. But they were happy not to fight. So Frederick V, called the Winter King because he was ruling actually during one winter, one and something year, was not very successful. They gathered mercenary army and they actually marched twice to walls of Vienna, but only to small parts, and the other was actually Gabor Betlen, not their army, but they didn't have force to siege it. But what happened? Now new Habsburg Emperor when Matthias II resigned. So Ferdinand II, really, how to say, clever strategist, agreed on armistice with northern German Lutheran princes. That Czechs expected these northern Germans to come to help them. And he said, come on, guys, I make peace with you and leave you these lands, but I need Prague. This was the heart of the Habsburg lands. So they accepted it. And you know why? Because they're Lutherans, evangelicals, and Frederick was Calvinist. So they didn't like Calvinists very much. So for that reason, Czechs actually were mistaken in these things. So he gathered a huge Catholic army. Spain provided him with a lot of men. Pope sent him some armies, some Italian dukes, and German Catholics, and they intervened in Bohemia, marched to Prague. Actually, White Mountain is much closer to Prague than in here because it is only a couple of few kilometers from Prague. 8 November 1620, there was Battle of Bila Hora. Still, it is being translated, the Battle of White Mountain. I don't know why, and there was no mountain. It was just a plain with small. It's not even a hill. It's a forest with a cross. And in here, in this battle, very short battle, Bohemian estates were defeated. Most of the army just ran away. They didn't want to fight, and Prague was immediately occupied. Now Czech lands became Habsburg domains until 1918. So for Czechs, this is symbol, Bila Hora, is symbol of their ultimate defeat. So now what followed? Now Ferdinand II ordered to terrorize all these supporters of these. Persecutions followed. They confiscated Protestant possessions and so on. Many Protestants emigrated to Slovakia, to Upper Hungary, then to Poland, then later to Netherlands. Among them, there was Janamos Comenius, great teacher. And of course, this violent recapitalization was followed by Jesuits occupying towns. Somehow, Czechs managed to survive with confessing, not to Calvinism, not to evangelical church, but to Czech Brethren Church that still was there. Still, the leaders of the uprising of this rebellion were captured, and 21st June 1621, 27 leaders of this revolt were being executed by executioner Jan Midlář, famous, and this cross is symbolized in Old Square Town in Prague as the memory of them. That's why even some people install more crosses in this square for the memory of all the victims of COVID. Among them, there was rector of Karlovy University, Jan Jesenius. Johann Jesenius was a Slovak who was the first physician who made first public autopsy and first rector of Karlovy University, one of the great Slovakians of those times. Still, Bila Hora, as I said, became a symbol of tragedy in fight against a foreign occupation in the collective memory of the Czechs. I think that I was really, I use a lot of time, so I'm not sure if I have time. Guys, what I can tell you is that you have to hand me over your stuff on April 18, and I will finish this lesson on and let you know. But just keep on with this presentation. Just keep on with this presentation that are the phases of war. What I added is actually these quotes of Janamos Comenius, and I will come back to them later on. It is about actually opening teaching and showing examples, instruction, and also practice. That's why also I try to give you a lot of pictures and try to make this application on contemporary times. Uh, to understand it, not only to memorize it. This is an important thing. To read without understanding means not to read at all. If you copy it, okay? Okay, this is very long one, so I'm not going to read it all, but there are so many of them. Let us have one in view welfare and humanity, selfishness, consideration of language, nationality, or religion. So when you're educated, you can overcome. The school is the manufacturer of humanity. If you are well educated and understand all these things, so you are probably human guy. Janamos Comenius University in Bratislava, 20 crowns during Czechoslovakia proclaimed to be the most beautiful banknotes of those years when it was issued in Czechoslovakia. Okay, some more stories about him, but I'm going to tell you this is example from one of his book Orbis Pictus, the pictures of the world, where you have like first bilingual dictionaries also with pictures around. Later on, just be sure that Friedrich he escaped from this battle of Bila Hora, escaped to his own Rhinish Palatinate of Pfalz, and the Catholic League of General Tilly followed him, where he managed to organize all these lands, including Netherlands, Hungarian Revolt, Ottomans, England, Denmark, Sweden, France, to organize, but they were defeated again. Even Gavor Betlen couldn't help them. When the war was over, okay, so this is some nice, you can then play it and stop it. Thence intervened Christian IV, the King of Denmark, invaded Germany, and now Catholic League was led by Albrecht of Wallenstein or Albrecht Wallsteiner, one of the most cunning commanders of this army of these wars, but the Danes were finally forced to sign a peace of Lübeck, and they promised not to enter the war. When it happened, Sweden entered war with their excellent, famous king Gustav II Adolf, who organized only small army of 12,000, but the first professional national army in history, where people were in military draft, picked up from population of Sweden. They were paid, they were trained, they were excellent, and they started another war, and they were able to defeat even Wallenstein armies. But Gustav II fell, and Axel Oxenstierna, the prime minister regent for the queen Christina, that she hated wars, and she rather was painting her beautiful paintings in Stockholm and so on. Finally, Albert of Wallenstein started to negotiate Sweden about changing the side, so he was assassinated in 1634 by Catholics. So this was interesting. Even Sweden had to sign up armistice with Ferdinand II when Saxony asked them to help. So for that reason, France entered the war not to stop fighting, not allow Catholic Habsburgs to win. And despite they were Catholics too, so for them it was much. So now the war changed from religious to power between Habsburgs and Bourbons. Now Bourbons are only young boys, Louis XIII. So that's why main guy who's ruling France is this one, Cardinal Richelieu, the regent of Kingdom of France. At the end of the war, new king will come, Louis XIV, and also as a boy he will have another regent, another Cardinal Mazarin, and much better, because in 1644 he started with peace negotiations that started to be in Osnabrück and Münster in West Pfalz, West Palatinate. Now, finally, in 1648, they signed up armistice in which all these things are in here. All the borders were restored from pre-war, but pre-Palatinate War. So Czechs remained part of Habsburg since 1624. France spread their borders. Sweden became like empire. Netherlands, Switzerland were approved their independence, and Germany remained like divided in many states, with Catholics in the south and Protestants in the north. All countries of Europe participating in at war. Some of the military, including Polish army, French or Swedish, whatever armies in here. Cruelty, horror. Not only that, big climate changes came out those times, the so-called small ice age, and it's not this political stuff of Krajniak and Klaus, but it was really colding. But this is different. We have global warming. Still, 8 million death casualties. First World War had 10 million. Napoleon Wars about 3 million. Results were, and all this Reformation, all this religious war, Germany was politically weakened and fragmented. Christian church was splintered, divided in the West. 150 years of religious warfare. Pope's power increased in Catholic lands. Economical development in Protestant countries, but decline in Catholic and especially in Eastern Orthodox countries, because Calvinism is bringing prospering economy for people. That's why it's since this time, since mid 17th century, there is big difference between Western Europe with Germany, Scandinavia, Benelux, and France, then Central Europe, which are Habsburg lands and Poland, and then Eastern Europe with either Islam or Eastern Orthodox, which are outside of Baroque scientific revolution, of later Enlightenment, and of this Protestant working ethics that is in here. Guys, this is all from me. Sorry for prolonging the lesson. I think that's all from me, and we have extra 1 minute. That's perfect. Ja vám prajem, decka, teda pekný deň a pošlite mi to všetci prosím naraz, musia tam byť zdroje. Tie zdroje môžete samozrejme písať vo Worde, toto môžete, no a dúfam, že tam bude všetko poctivo vyplňte, ak vám tam nebude nič chýbať, máte zdroje dobre napísané, kompletnom tom zadaní, čiže aj s menom, s názvom článku, s ňom a s linkom celým, tak máte jednotky za toto. Dobre, pozdravujem vás, ahojte, majte sa, pekný deň.